Hello and welcome to the Cougar Prowl podcast. This is episode 2. I am WSU beat writer for the Spokesman Review, Greg Woods, joined by CougFan.com's Jamey and we are 2 days removed from WSU's season opening win over Idaho. 13-10 was the final margin. Cougs go up 10-0 early on, and things get a little dicey down the stretch. Vandals get a chance to take the lead in the final minutes, but Cougs defense comes up strong and forces them into a field goal, which allows them to drive down the field. And Jack Stevens walks it off. Well, mostly walks it off. There's kind of a weird sequence there at the end with them restarting the game. But they do get it done. First win of head coach Jimmy Rogers' tenure. And they're 1-0. It might not have been pretty, but they will go into next week against San Diego State at 1-0. That'll be their homecoming game. And there is much to unpack from this one. And I think just as it was last week, top of the mind is going to be the starting quarterback, which we know to have been Jaxon Potter. Third-year sophomore, is his second career game on Saturday. And the first thing that I want to ask about, Jamey, is just like our reactions to that coming to fruition. The first thing that I want to mention is that what we didn't know is that he would be revealing this in a TV interview on the CW. And Jamey and I and a couple other writers were hanging out on the field before the game, and maybe 15 or 20 feet away from us was Jimmy Rogers doing this interview. Now, we're not sure if that was the interview that ended up airing on TV where he revealed the quarterback, but it is funny to know that we were only a few feet away from getting the scoop. So I guess we got to be better about that. But anyway, yeah, I think both of us were, at least to some extent, surprised to hear that it was Jaxon Potter. Jamey, give me your reaction and just kind of how you felt about that.
Yeah, I think there were some rumors kind of swirling late in the week, but I think you heard every name throughout the week. You heard Potter, you heard Duggar, you heard Eckhouse, you even heard of Johnny Shepard, who Jimmy Rogers revealed today was kind of more of a three-man battle down the stretch between Duggar, Potter, and Eckhouse. But at first I definitely was pretty surprised. I mean, we both said last week we thought it'd be Eckhouse, and I think as the more I thought about it, though, it's like, all right. I think they liked Potter's decision-making a little bit better than maybe Duggar, but I also think there's the part of where he's got the bigger arm than Eckhouse, so you kind of start to wonder, okay, I mean, this does in some ways make some sense that this is kind of who they'd want, and as bad as the offense was on Saturday, and we'll get into that, Jaxon Potter was perfectly fine. I mean, I don't know if I'd go as far to say, very good, because you score 13 points, some of that does fall on the quarterback. But he was not the reason they were not moving the ball.
Correct. And he was not perfect, like you said. He did sail a few throws. There was the one to, I think it was Josh Meredith, that would have been a first down, pretty big gain that could have been. Couldn't hit him, but again, this is a third-year player playing his second career college game, like I said, and that is just the way that goes sometimes. But yeah, I was plenty surprised too. We both, like I said, we both thought it was going to be Zevi. And I think the one, maybe the biggest reason why we were surprised that it wasn't Zevi was how much the coaches valued the mobility in their quarterback. And Jaxon Potter has a lot of great qualities, and that's why they went with him. But mobility is not very high on the list, which is okay. And obviously they felt like it was okay, but I think that was the main reason why we thought that, Zevi and even Julian Duggar might have been higher on that list. But it is Potter. Final stats for him, that was 24-31 through the year, 209 yards, one touchdown pass, which went to Josh Meredith in the corner of the end zone. And he was fine. He wasn't great, like you said, but I think for your first career college start, he could have done a lot worse.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I think the thing that impressed me too is, as you said, he's not the most mobile quarterback in the world. He's not going to wow you with his legs, but he made a number of throws on the run, in a sense of rolling outside the pocket. And some of these were on design, kind of bootlegs or kind of design little sprint outs, but he did a really good job, when he would get outside the pocket, not making the wrong decision, not forcing something. And, there was a couple plays where he would kind of roll and he'd just stop a little bit and it'd be like, you were surprised he wasn't running. And part of that is, you spent all of last year watching John Mateer. If there was an opening, he was taking off. Potter would kind of get outside, roll out to maybe his right, stand there for a minute, taking what was open and then find a guy. I mean, I think he did a really good job of that. And you look at the incompletions, according to Pro Football Focus, of the 7 incompletions, there were 4 drops in there. Were there that many in my opinion? I don't know. Stat Broadcast only has 1. That's kind of the only one I can remember is Tony Freeman, who then had a great game. You got a spike in there. I think there was a throwaway. So he was very effective. And I think the other thing that Jimmy Rogers talked about that he really liked, and we saw that, was the decision-making. There really wasn't a ball. There was maybe one throw where it's like, okay, maybe try to force that a little bit. But even then, it was harmless. It wasn't at risk of being intercepted. But the decision-making was very solid, very sharp. There wasn't a lot of, as great as John Mateer was last year, and as great as Cam Ward was, the year before to some degree, there was always those throws that you just kind of winced at, right? It was Mateer against Boise State. That's the one that stands out late in the half. There just really wasn't those throws with Potter where you're like, oh, what is he doing? Okay. There were a couple tight windows he threw into, but for the most part, they were good reads, and I think that's what stood out to me.
Yeah, Jaxon Potter, 0 interceptions and 0 sacks, which one is a credit to their offensive line, which we'll obviously get to a little bit later. But they were great in pass protection, and what is clear from talking to Jimmy Rogers today, which we also will talk about a little later, we talked to him today, is that what they really prioritized was minimizing interceptions, minimizing sacks, and that was 2 of the bigger reasons why they went with him out of fall camp. Is that not only was he great, late game, 4th down, 2-minute situations, which is a big reason why they went with him, but also just minimizing mistakes, and he did he did 3 of those things in the game. So I think in those ways, they probably got out of him what they, thought they would based out of fall camp, based on those 3 qualities. So he was good. And I think what I want to touch on next, which is what I just kind of mentioned, was the offensive line. Like I said, they were awesome in pass protection. I think they graded out 70-something in the PFF grades. Not that those are the end-all be-all, but they did kind of match the eye test. Like I said, 0 sacks, which was their forte. What they were not as great at, and I think what there is a little bit of nuance in, is the run blocking. The stats are not pretty. 3 rushing yards on 22 carries. Now, part of that is Julian Duggar, having a track down to bad snap in the 4th quarter from Brock Dew, which is also surprising that a trusted veteran like that would, have a mistake like that. But that is, even if you had 14 of those, or 10 or 11, or whatever the loss was, that's still 12. 19. Okay, well, at 19 of that, you still get 22 rushing yards. So, not great either. And I think this is a little bit of kind of what it is with Jaxon Potter. Brand new unit, well, mostly, 3 new guys, new scheme, new approach, and that's just kind of the way it goes. Now, you might say, okay, well, it's against an FCS opponent in Idaho. Why is this such a struggle? I don't know, man. I think they could have played any number of teams where they could have had, a little bit of a struggle with the cohesion. So I don't think that's anything to be totally surprised by. I think what you are surprised by is getting beat repeatedly on the interior of the offensive or defensive line of Idaho, which that is where some of these, interior runs went south. Was just, sometimes you guys, WSU's offensive linemen were just kind of just getting beat. Sometimes they were blocking nobody, which is what Christian Hilborn was guilty of on a couple occasions. So I think part of it is concerning because you don't want to kind of get moved, penetrated at the line of scrimmage, which is the way Rogers framed it, by a team like Idaho. I'm not trying to diminish what they're capable of. Obviously, they are picked 12th in the FCS preseason poll. They're going to be great this year. We expect them to be awesome. But you don't want that to happen in, week 1 against your FBS offensive linemen.
No, and I think, we made a point to talk about last week how, they were small up front. And, one of the things we said is that doesn't always mean everything, but there was a pretty distinct size advantage. And I think, what Jimmy Rogers was saying a little bit earlier is there were a lot of, I think, not so much missed assignments, but lack of communication. Guys were, weren't blocking the right guy, and some of that, there are some first game kind of familiarity. you look at the offensive line, obviously you've got the veterans in Hilborn and Dew, but, it was the first ever starts for Ashton Tripp and Johnny Lester. A.J. Vipulu is a veteran, but he's been in a different school. And then you even think even deeper, okay, for those offensive linemen that have been at Wazoo in the past, they were recruited to a pass-heavy scheme. Hilborn and Dew were recruited into the run and shoot. Lester and Tripp to the whatever Dickert got the air raid, the Coug raid. That was what it was, the Coug raid. But so I think there is some familiarity that has to come with really learning how to run blocking into a new scheme. And obviously you work on that in the offseason, but it's different when you go live against a new opponent, against guys that, are not wearing the same uniform as you. And I think to some degree as well, Idaho's DC, Court Dennison, who known name in the Northwest, was a great player at Washington. He's coached at Oregon. But this was his first game coordinating. There wasn't a lot of tape on what his tendencies and what his styles were going to be. And he obviously understood that Washington State wanted to run the ball, and that was fairly clear. So they stacked the box. They crashed the edges in. So suddenly there's 8-9 guys in the box, and there's no way to go outside. And I think that put Wazoo in a unique spot where I can say with a lot of confidence, I don't think in their mind Jaxon Potter's first start featured 31 throws. It also probably didn't feature a 13-10 win, but I think they probably expected to keep him around 15 to 20. But they had to. They had to make that adjustment. It took a little while. Roger said as much. They've got to adjust earlier. But, I think when you just look at the run game as a whole, it was a lot of things that I think, yes, are concerning. You can't get bullied off the line by Idaho. You can't get bullied off the line by anyone, but especially against what theoretically is going to be the smallest defensive line you face this year. And we talked about it too last week. There wasn't a lot of experience on that Idaho line. That all said, they made up for not having that much experience by having 7 or 8 guys. It was almost the reverse of the rush 3, drop 8. It was rush 8, drop 3 because they were selling out on the run. So I do think that some of that will come just with more reps together. Again, Vipulu didn't get here until May. Lester and Tripp, again, these are young guys in terms of their starting experience. So I think there's reason to believe that there will be more communication. Things will get sorted out a little bit. You have a new quarterback behind center, so there's that kind of communication. But, I think it looked like offensively a team that basically was returning 3 guys and had 3 starters and had all kinds of new faces from up front to the quarterback to the running back, and not even necessarily new as in transfers, but new as in guys who really hadn't seen the field. When you talk about Tripp, Lester, Potter, and then obviously all the transfers in there as well.
Yeah, like I said, there were a few times where it looks like they end up just not knowing their assignments or who they're supposed to be blocking. And this is what I wrote about in my story yesterday, is that to be fair, you and I are in no really position to know who's assigned to who and what's really going on. So I do want to kind of make that caveat, is that offensive line is probably the hardest position group to kind of evaluate on tape, especially when you have just 2 writers like Jamey and I. So I want to make it clear that we're not pronouncing ourselves offensive line coaches here. We kind of just know what we know, and we don't know the exact intricacies of their assignments. So I do think that some of the technical things will get turned around. I don't think, your 5th-year senior starting offensive lineman, Christian Hilborn, is going to continue to block nobody in the weeks ahead. That kind of stuff will sort itself out. What you don't want to see, like you said, is kind of just getting pushed around, which I think did happen a few times. But like you said, I think there is, plenty of reason to believe that some of the more technical, fundamental issues like that do get turned around in the weeks to come.
Yeah, exactly. And even when we talk about Hilborn, and again, I think there was some miscommunication on the assignments from everybody. I think it was, not a great day run blocking. But again, he's a guy who was recruited and has only played in a pass-heavy scheme. So maybe no surprise, he was very good in pass protection. They all were. It was a very clean day. It wasn't there were no sacks, but Potter was running for his life. There were times last year where John Mateer wouldn't get sacked, but it wasn't because there wasn't pressure. It was because he was so elusive. I think there was 8 total pressures in the game, is I think what the number was. 1 quarterback hit on Potter. In that case, they did a very good job in pass protection as did the running backs and tight ends, which was not often the case last year, particularly at running back, unless Dylan Payne was in the game. He was their best pass blocker last year. So I think there were some good things in watching the team pass block, and I think that should almost offer encouragement that they can sort out the run blocking. There are times where you just don't have the guys to block. Guys just aren't good blockers, period. I think you saw a lot of guys who were very stout at pass blocking because a lot of them, that's what they've been trained to do. And then the run blocking's maybe going to come along a little bit steady. I think, by week 4 or 5, hopefully it starts in week 2, but I think by the time you get midway through the season, you'll see a lot more cohesion. And I do think that once you get the cohesion worked out, again, there's no lack of talent. These are two, multi-year starters at Washington State. Obviously, Tripp and Lester earned these roles. Tripp earning it over a pretty highly touted transfer in Jalen Caldwell. Vaipulu's played a lot of football, so there is certainly talent and experience. There's certainly talent and experience on one side and one part of the line, and then the other guys kind of have to come along with that experience. I think as they start to mesh and gel, you'll see the run blocking and just the overall communication and assignments pick up.
What I also wonder about is how many of the runs that get stacked up against Idaho were just the wrong read by Potter on an RPO. I think there were a few occasions where he takes a shotgun handoff, hands it to Kirby Voorhees or Angel Johnson, and they get, stacked up at the line of scrimmage. Well, they were crashing in the edges, like you said, and maybe the read for Potter is to pull it and throw the ball. Now, this is where it gets tricky, reporting on them, is because I cannot imagine a world where I thought about doing this, but I cannot imagine a world where we asked Jimmy Rogers, hey man, are these RPOs? What is he supposed to do here? He's not a coach that's going to say something like that. So that's what makes, evaluating that kind of stuff a little tricky. But I do think if there are multiple next steps for Jaxon Potter to take after this game. But I think that if there's one development that also turns around some of these run blocking issues, is if these are true RPOs and if he can make that decision to pull, because they were crashing on the edges every time, like I said. So if he can make that read, I think we're talking a lot less about the run blocking issues if these are RPOs and he makes that read, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think the part of it too is I think the way that Idaho was playing defensively is they're selling out expecting Potter's not going to keep it because that isn't so much part of his game is the mobility. That's the tough part about running zone read and RPO with a quarterback who isn't the most mobile in the world. You can do the RPO game because there's still the run or the pass option. You either hand it off or you throw. But the zone read also really incorporates that quarterback run, that read option. And that's where, it gets tricky, as you said, with Potter because he's not the most mobile. Now, again, I said this last week. He's not Luke Falk. I said it about Zeddy maybe. I said someone wasn't Luke Falk. Luke will also be the first to tell you he was about the slowest quarterback ever. He's not Luke, but he's also not Mateer or Duggar from what, the little glimpse we saw of him in live action Saturday, plus what we saw in fall camp, plus what he did at Pittsburgh in the bowl game. So there is that aspect of if Potter's going to run that zone read, he has to become elite at actually making the read because he doesn't have necessarily the mobility to make up for it otherwise, and a lot of teams are going to just sell out on the handoff. So I think in that way, it's not totally surprising that he struggled with it a little bit. That's a tough concept, especially in your first game. I don't imagine he's run a lot of zone read in his life. I mean, he certainly probably wasn't doing it much the last couple of years. So there is a learning curve involved here. I mean, you got to think it's not just a new bunch of new players, right? The last couple of years, there was always, it's new faces, but they were always still running basically the same scheme. Maybe even when you change coordinators from, Eric Morris to Ben Arbuckle, Brian Moore to Jeff Schmedding, it was still for the most part the same scheme. Even as you went with the coaching changes from Leach to Rolovich to Dickert, they were all variations of an air raid offense. Whether it's the run and shoot, the coup grade, the spread and shred, whatever you want to call it. This is very, very different from an offensive standpoint. And unlike on defense, where a lot of the guys who are running this defense were at South Dakota State last year and know this defense, there's a lot of new faces to this offense. The only South Dakota State guy playing a big role, or South Dakota State guys playing big roles on Saturday, Angel Johnson, Kirby Voorhees. So new quarterback, new receivers, new offensive line, all very kind of new to Danny Freund's scheme. So it's one of those things where, again, you can practice it as many times as you want. You can drill it. You can study the playbook. but sometimes you just have to go out there and you get game experience, and it just steadily gets better and better. I talked to John Stiglmeyer, the great SDSU coach, a few weeks ago, and he made a good point. You don't wave a magic wand. It doesn't just happen naturally where you go from one coach to another and it works out to perfection. For every Indiana last year, there's 100. Okay, it takes a little time.
Final couple things on here before we get to some of your questions from Twitter. One, I think what has kind of gone understated sometimes about this offense is that the coaches are asking them to process a lot of information. This is not an easy offense to get the hang of. The first position that comes to mind for me is the tight end spot. I mean, they want these guys to be great run blockers. They want them to catch passes. They need them to be on the same page in terms of shifts and motions and all these different kinds of things. And I think a lot of it spreads out to other positions as well. I mean, at the quarterback spot, you have Jaxon Potter in his first year starting, trying to make reads out on RPO, but also processing a defense for the first time in his life. And so there's a lot of higher level processing that will take a little bit of time to get the hang of, especially in a new offense, and especially in an offense that asks a lot of players to be smart and process information rather quickly. Last thing that I want to address before we take questions is, what did you think about pulling Potter for Julian Duggar on the 2 series that they did that? They do that, I think it was for the final series of the third quarter and the first of the fourth quarter. And the first series comes after a turnover on Idaho's part. That was a forced fumble by Matt Durans and recovered by Kyle Peterson, who was, might I mention, I think one of the guys that you shouted out last week as guys that we might see a little bit more of them. I've kind of gone understated. So shout out to Jamey for nailing that one. But anyway, so after that turnover, they put in Julian Duggar for what would be 2 series. Both end in 3 and outs. Obviously, one of them was kind of torpedoed by a bad snap from Brock Dew that sets them back, and you're kind of in your own end zone at that point. So that one went sideways. But I think it was, for me, what I thought about as the days went by on Saturday, it was just I don't fault the thinking at all. I think you need a spark. Your offense is kind of, for better or worse, your quarterback is a guy playing his second college game. And you have a guy that has a much different skill set than the guy that's in the game right now. I think there is nothing wrong with that thinking at all. What I think you can debate is the timing. You're coming off of a turnover. That is the spark, right? I mean, you got to call the right plays. You got to execute on offense. But the spark is there. You know what I mean? And so I think there is for sure a role for Duggar in that game. There could be one moving forward for sure. What I thought was a little curious was just the timing, because, like I said, the spark is there. I think you have what you need in that moment.
Yeah, I would say this. I like the move after the turnover, and I'll tell you why. Obviously, the offense, as Jimmy Rogers has said himself, was not moving. So you put Duggar in, and you figure, okay, worst case scenario here, outside of him turning it over, is the offense stalls again, and we get 3 points out of it. Because of where the position you're in, you're already well into field goal range. You're not at a tremendous risk of completely just torpedoing a drive. At that point, it was probably a feeling of, okay, we got to try something. So I actually don't mind that series at all. And lo and behold, he's a couple shoelaces away from a touchdown. I mean, I was rewatching the play last night. He gets tripped up, otherwise he's gone. There's no one between him and the end zone. And he does that, we're probably, genius. The second possession is where I'm a little iffy on it. On one hand, I get maybe the theory that they looked at it and said, hey, he was, again, shoelaces away from breaking a big play. Maybe this spark works. And I think, to Duggar's credit, if it's not for the bad snap, maybe that drive works out. It's hard to say exactly. I mean, it was basically you're suddenly 19 yards back, and then, you're on the 3-yard line. You have to run the ball. You don't want to take a sack. And then it's a quick incompletion. So I think to some degree I wouldn't blame. I'm not putting it on him, but I would have probably gone back to Potter on after that first drive. Said, all right, we tried it with Duggar. didn't create a whole lot of spark. If he goes and marches them into the end zone, and that's where it is the tough decision, because are you making that call based on a couple of shoelaces? Because he was going to score if he's not tripped up. And if he does score, then how do you take him out? So I think there's a lot of, again, little intricacies, a lot of, game within the game you think about when making those decisions. I personally, again, I would have just gone back to Potter after that first drive, but I see kind of where their thinking was, and I do like the decision to try him on the short field, see what he can bring you. But at the end of the day, if Potter's mobility is an issue, then if it's that much of an issue and so on, I think this is, I guess, what confused me is he wasn't the reason the offense was struggling. Now, I get the idea, a more mobile quarterback forces the defense to think about more, but it wasn't because of Jaxon Potter that the offense wasn't moving. The only times they moved is when he was basically said, all right, go throw the football. You look at the last drive of the game, the one to win it, they ran the ball once, and it was on a great decision. Everyone thinks you're throwing the ball. Hey, no huddle, here's a quick handoff. They don't get set. Kirby Voorhees goes for 11. That was probably their best run of the game. I think maybe Voorhees had another decent one. But
I think that was the longest one.
It was either that. I thought he had one for 12. Voorhees had like two decent runs. It was just there was also so many losses in there. But I think that to me was okay. Let the guy throw a little bit more. And I think as you look back in that game in hindsight, if they just kind of, I don't want to say abandon the run, but if they focus on the pass on a few more of those drives, you're probably looking at a couple more touchdowns, because eventually Idaho would have to back off on their bringing 9 men up the middle, and it would open up the play action. It would open up a little more of the run game. And again, I think that Voorhees play to me stands out a lot, because Idaho is selling out for the pass. As you're trying to drive down the field, clock's ticking. You go no huddle, you have them on their heels. Boom, Kirby Voorhees, wide open hole, 11 yards.
For sure. We are going to move into your questions now, but there's one little note I want to make before we segue into that segment. Putting Duggar in the moment seemed to, in some ways, indicate that Zevi Eckhouse would be QB3. And as of Monday, actually right before we started recording, they put out their Week 2 depth chart going into San Diego State this Saturday. And indeed, Zevi Eckhouse is listed as the third quarterback on the roster. We have Jaxon Potter, obviously, Julian Duggar, and then there's an or separating Zevi Eckhouse and Johnny Shepard. Maybe worth noting, like we mentioned earlier before we recorded, that Jimmy Rogers was asked about this, about the progression of the competition during the of the QBs in fall camp. He said it was close between Jaxon Potter, Julian Duggar, and Zevi Eckhouse. Curiously, no mention of Johnny Shepard in there, so it would seem to indicate that it was more of a 3 quarterback race than anything. But we're going to wrap the Zevi thing into the next segment, which will.
Can I just add one thing to that? Just
totally.
I would just say, maybe kind of playing devil's advocate a little bit, is even if Zevi was number 2, you weren't going to go to Zevi to spark the zone read in the ground game.
That I agree with.
So that is very much, I think, something just to note. Now, he might be number 3. I'm not discrediting that theory at all. But I do think if that was Jimmy Rogers' thinking, is to get the ground game going, which he said after the game, you were going to go to Duggar no matter what. Even if Zevi was number 2, even if Zevi was number 1, Duggar was the guy in that situation who you were going to go to.
No, I totally agree, and that's where I would kind of push back on this like kind of natural temptation to say he's QB3 based off of that rotation, because like you said, they needed the spark on the ground. All right, now we are going to take some of your questions from Twitter. I put out a tweet last night, asking for some questions, and I got a lot more than even we were expecting, honestly. So that is phenomenal. And the first one that I want to tackle, just as a way to kind of clear things up and kind of show you guys how the sausage is made. We have a question from Dr. Strange Golf, who says, "Why has the media not asked more questions about Zevi Eckhouse not being named the starter?" Well, to answer your question, we only found out the starter almost the same time you guys did, which was when Jaxon Potter, runs out for the first snap on Saturday. So on Saturday, the only real chance we had to ask him about this was after the game. And to kind of clue you guys into the process of how this works is that, he does his post-game press conference, and we're all, in a room with him, and there's Jamey and I, there's TV reporters, there's a couple other print writers that are there asking questions, and we only get 2 or 3 each. So you have to kind of go through the list in your head of, okay, what is the most pressing issue here? And obviously you got to ask about Jaxon Potter being named the starter. What went into that? What went into Julian Duggar coming in for him when he did, which is what I asked about. So, maybe we should have, but I just want people to understand that, like, there is a pecking order here in terms of what is most important to ask the head coach of the team about. And a lot of that had to do with you played Idaho really close and all of the things that went into that. And you also go into these things understanding that you're going to talk to him on Monday, 2 days later. So you will still have the opportunity to ask him about Zevi Eckhouse, which is what we did.
Right. I would say, I would even just say, I don't even think we should have asked him after the game. There were so many storylines that were more prominent than why is Zevi not the starter. The story that was prominent was why was Jaxon Potter the starter? And I'm not saying that like in a questioning way. It's just like, we obviously wanted to hear. We hadn't heard him talk about who the starting quarterback was going to be. Why was the running game so poor? If they win that game by 30 points, then yes, maybe the Eckhouse question comes up. But there were a lot more prominent things that were directly correlated to the game itself than why not Zevi? And as Greg said, we didn't know. There was no question we could have asked before after the game. He did not say who the quarterback was going to be. We asked today. It was our first chance to really ask. And, he basically said that it wasn't so much what Zevi didn't do, it's just what Jaxon did do. And so sometimes that's just the decision he saw. And obviously, this wasn't a hasty decision. But, I think the one thing that kind of stands out to me is it might be the deep ball if we're talking about the two quarterbacks, and Jaxon has a stronger arm than Zevi. And, and it's not like Jimmy just said, now we just like Jaxon better. Like, he gave a lot of details on why. He took way less sacks in practice. He was had our highest completion percentage. He cited true completion percentage, like catchable passes. So there was, a lot of evidence from these last couple weeks that Rodgers pointed to. And I know the obvious question that comes up is, well, Zevi played great in the bowl game, and he's had a lengthy career. And I would just say to this, you can't judge what happened in the bowl game first now. He did play very well in the bowl game. I'm not debating that under some very poor circumstances. But, his favorite target in that game is now with the New England Patriots. I mean, let's call a spade. Whether it's Zevi Eckhouse or John Mateer, they were helped out greatly by how good Kyle Williams was. I mean, and that's not a knock on the quarterbacks. A lot of great quarterbacks over the years get helped out by how good the receivers are. But, and then you look at it was a different scheme. There was so much different. You can't draw from what he did in the bowl game and apply that to he should be the starter. I think he definitely proved that he deserved a shot in the bowl game. But I think for running the offense they wanted, they obviously decided on Potter. But, without getting too far off track and onto a tangent, no, it's exactly as Greg said. We didn't have a chance to ask him, and there was so many things that we were going to ask. I mean, there were 10 more questions I would have asked Saturday before getting into why not Zevi, knowing we could probably ask that today.
Exactly. Because like I said, you go into post-game press conferences with the understanding that you'll get a chance to ask about what you don't ask on Monday. There's a lot more to that, obviously, but we got to keep it rolling because of how many questions we have here. Next one I want to go into is from King Cougs 56, who asks, were practices closed off to the media last week? How was there no indication that Potter was the leader in the race? Both you and Vinnick did not really mention Potter in last week's prediction. Does that mean all four quarterbacks were getting equal reps at practice up until the game? To answer your question, King Coug, the last open practice, which was the last day of fall camp, which was I believe, August the 15th, was the last.
Correct.
Okay, perfect. And at that point, practices go from open, which means that we can report on what we see at practice, to they're closed, and we cannot even literally go into the practice field while they're practicing. So, that is kind of the way that works. And but this is a fair question, I think, because I'm not even sure how much we mentioned Jaxon Potter in our podcast last week.
No, I mean, 100%, we estimated him as a contender in this competition. I think, admittedly, when Rogers said before fall camp it's going to be a 4-quarterback competition, I'll say straight up, my feeling was, okay, it's Duggar, Shepard, and Eckhouse. He's saying Potter, so it feels like, he's part of this battle, etc., which is, a lot of coaches will do that. Jake Dickert would say that Cam Ward was in a battle when Cam Ward was never in a battle. So from that, yeah, we and it was never that he played poorly in fall camp at all. He actually had a very good fall camp. We just kind of were under the assumption of, okay, they're either going to go with Eckhouse's experience, they're going to go with Duggar's legs, or Shepard's legs at that point. So, and to answer the second part, the reps were equal. There was no tell in the fall camp that we saw as to who the quarterback was going to be. There was no more reps for one guy. All we could do is judge off what we thought their performances were, and what we think does not match what the coaches think. And, I'd like to think we have a pretty good idea of, feeling out who plays well here, who plays well there. But there's a reason we're in this profession and they're in that one. They also have every rep from practice on tape. They can look at things we're not. So, no, we absolutely, I think, undersold Potter as a possibility in this competition. And, that's just, and it wasn't anything he wasn't doing in camp. It felt like there was, Zevi and his experience, Duggar and his athleticism, really, as you kind of got down to it. And, so that is the long way of answering. We just kind of didn't know.
No, and to your point, like, because the reps were so equal, what we go off of is the plays they make and the tools they have, and we have to go off our understanding of what they prioritize at the QB position, which is mobility, which is experience, which is size. And, Zevi Eckhouse checked a lot of those boxes in combination with his experience, like you said. So, to defend us, I think that there's nothing we did wrong with our prediction. It was just, they are privy to a lot more than what we are, and in their mind, they like Potter. So that's kind of the way that went.
I'll just add this too to some, just to kind of finalize it. In the past when there's been quarterback battles, I think last year it was pretty, I don't want to say clear, but it was a pretty strong feeling that at the end of the day it was going to be John Mateer. You go back to 2021, I know this is before Greg got here, and I know Jarrett Garantano got the start, but everyone pretty much felt like eventually it was going to be Jaden Delora's job. This one, there just really wasn't anything that suggested it. It wasn't like there was one guy that was so clearly better than the others. So I think to that degree, it was a very hard competition to kind of unpack.
For sure. All right, we got to keep it rolling because we have a lot more to get to, so maybe we can spend a little less time on these questions.
No.
Jamey is a lot of things, but
concise is not one of them.
Exactly. That's what I was trying to say. Okay, our next question is going to come from BJ, who asks, our defense won the day against Idaho, and our offense struggled, to put it lightly. Was this also a trend in fall camp with the defense dominating? How surprised were you by the offense's lackluster performance? Has our offense played better in practice than they showed in the game?
I'll start this one. It'll cut me off quicker.
Okay, go for it.
I wouldn't say dominating, but I definitely would say the defense had the stronger fall camp. That said, that happens a lot. Defense is usually going to be ahead. The defense had a better fall camp in 2024. So do with that information what you will. We all saw what the offense and the defense looked like. To answer the second part, I was surprised by how lackluster the offense was. I wasn't expecting 60 points. I wasn't expecting 13 points. I think I predicted about 40 to 13, which was a little too much, but I definitely did not think that they would only score 13. The offense has played better in practice than they showed in the game. And that's something that we'll get into a little bit, but I don't think the offense you're going to see for a lot of this season is what you saw Saturday night. There's obviously some issues to iron out, to correct, to fix, but the offense was not as poor and just anemic as we saw on Saturday.
Did you really pick them 40 to 13?
Yes.
Okay, well, I guess I win closest pick competition. I think I went like a 2-score game for the Cougs.
I did not think – it wasn't so much that I thought Wazoo's offense was going to be great. I undersold Idaho. I thought they had lost too much to really be competitive right away, and that's my mistake.
Once again, we are not coaches.
Correct.
And I definitely agree with the defense looking a little better than the offense if you had to tip the scales in one direction or another. I think what we were impressed by throughout fall camp was just their pass rush and like some of the ways they are penetrating the line of scrimmage. I mean, I don't know how many times we wrote names like Max Balloon and Buda Poletti and Bryson Lamb, Ram Stevenson. I mean, we can go up and down the list. There's so many guys. And part of that is just, they rotate so many guys and they're all able to make an impact. But I think in that way with the defense, dominating, the way they did on Saturday, we were not totally surprised by that. And honestly, that is something that I want to take a second and just kind of talk about. Is just like how awesome their defense was. I mean, in the first game as a Cougar, Caleb Franzel leads the way with 11 tackles. He was awesome. I think Anthony Polano was second in tackles with 9. And they forced 2 turnovers with the forced fumble by Matt Durance and then also the one by I'm drawing a blank. Who was the other forced fumble by?
Tasse.
That's right. And that one was recovered by Ram Stevenson. Huge suspension. So I think in these kinds of like slow, low scoring games, there is a tendency or a temptation to be like, okay, this game is just kind of slow. It's the offenses are not playing very well, which they weren't, to be fair. But if Wazoo's defense was not nearly as good, and like they might be trailing at some point in the game. And like I don't think it was like a guarantee that this game had to be some like slow knockdown drag kind of game. I mean, their defense had to be awesome to keep them within distance, which they were. I mean, we have not talked about guys like Tucker Large, for example, but that is because he was so good.
There is an art, and I've said this for years, kind of in the reverse way, of knowing how to win, and it plagued Washington State so much in 22 and 23, and especially in 23, their ability to win close games, and even down the stretch last year. You want to know what helps you win close games? You got 5 guys who started or who played big roles on a couple national title teams. When you talk about Large, Durance, Humphrey, Franzel, Balloon, Polano was on the team last year. They didn't win, but they were in the semis. There is a culture of winning that was built at South Dakota State, and I think those guys bring it here. They expect to win, and I don't know if maybe in the past that's always been true for Washington State, but I think you saw that rub off on the other guys who were on the field, the guys like Stevenson and Lamb and Colson, who were here before, and then obviously McKenna as well, and Poletti, and whoever was on the field. You could sense that there was just an expectation to get a stop.
For sure. All right, we're going to keep it rolling. Next question comes from Cody Rogers, who says, and this is actually very timely based on an update we just got from Jimmy Rogers. He says, do you think the offense would look much better with a weapon like Ellison out there when he recovers from his injury? Or is the offensive line the thing that needs to change to make them more explosive?
All the above.
All of the above is correct. Well, we just found out from Jimmy Rogers, we didn't really find out much, but he did say that he wasn't sure about Devin Ellison's status moving forward. And in the same breath, he said that Kale Reeder was expected to get back into practice and then play this coming week, which he did not mention any of that for Devin Ellison. So you read between the lines, it sounds like, Ellison might be out for, at least a couple of weeks is the way I kind of read that.
They also sent out the 2 deep just before we started recording, and Ellison was not on there, which signifies that this probably isn't a week. This probably isn't a he's back next week type of injury. Mackenzie Aline's now on the depth chart. They also removed a lot of the oars, but to answer the question, there is a lack of explosiveness without Ellison. He is their biggest downfield threat. He's, I think, probably their most just overall skilled receiver. And that's not to say the other guys aren't skilled, but they have very things they specialize in. Meredith, possession, route running. Noga, kind of the big body. Obviously, Smithson and Freeman, speed guys. So they're going to have to adjust without it. But obviously, in the same breath, if the offensive line can run block, it opens everything up.
There are a lot of things that we are talking about from the Idaho game that I think we would be talking about a lot differently if like small things like that change. You know what I mean? Like if Devin Ellison is out there, we're probably not talking as much about, maybe their run blocking issues because they scored, 30 points or whatever. Right. Now, I don't know if he makes that big of a difference, but just like having that kind of threat out there, I think it makes a difference.
Next question comes from Dev, DW_Devin. Why are these South Dakota dudes so angry?
Great question.
It's a great question that we noticed really more so in fall camp than in the spring. And the simplicity of it is they just are gamers, and they play with a chip. They play with aggression. They play with an expectation to win games because that's what they have done their whole career. I said this a few times in fall camp. The defense is not going to make a lot of friends with how much Large and Durant, and we haven't even seen Reeder on the field talk. Even then, you get into the front of the defense. You got Caden Beatty, you got Jack Janikowski. So, South Dakota State guys, the guys who came over, spent the last years playing FCS football, and at some point in time, we're told they weren't good enough to play in the FBS or good enough to play at the Power 4 level. So it builds a chip on your shoulder. It builds, just kind of a resiliency and a fight, and I don't want to say an anger, but they play like they have something to prove. They play with aggression, and they play to win. And sometimes when you play like that, you're not going to make a lot of friends along the way, and I think we saw that this weekend.
No, and I think, and this is kind of what the coaches indicated throughout fall camp, is that and this is what we talked about during our last podcast, was that they would much rather than be a little too crazy than not crazy enough. They were, like I said, a few instances during fall camp where there was a few dust ups, some punches being thrown. Was not all from the SDSU guys, but I think it just speaks to a larger theme of even outside of those guys, they want them to be, they want them to toe the line between, going a little too crazy and kind of playing a little too safe. And I think that's. You have that, and you get what you get with these guys, and yeah.
I'll also add, I think I said a couple times before fall camp too. They're going to go to a lot of teams into dumb penalties, 30 yards worth of penalties by Joshua Wood, the Idaho quarterback, and I can assure you that it was helped along by the fact that Tucker Large and Matt Durant and that defense just kept talking and talking and talking. And young quarterback, I would say they rattled him in some way in that way.
Do you remember seeing Cale Reeder talk for the first time during fall camp?
It was so Reeder did not practice in the spring. He was recovering from a torn pec, and he was pretty just kind of there. There wasn't a whole lot. Now, granted, we only covered about 3 fall or spring ball practices because they were closed. First day of spring or fall camp, he doesn't say a whole lot. He's just kind of there, and we talked to him after practice. Very just kind of, kind of mild-mannered, well-spoken kid, 60-year guy, veteran guy. All of a sudden, day 2, it was like someone attached a megaphone and then put Ron Stone Jr.'s voice into him, and all of a sudden, Cale Reeder didn't stop talking the rest of camp, and it was like, what? It was kind of it caught us so off guard because he's so, and the same thing with Large. Large doesn't like talking to the media. I think he's a little bit just kind of, unassuming, a little shy and something, but on the field, these guys, Durant's the same way. Durant's is, he's a good talker, but he's not an exuberant, eccentric personality like you'd see out of a natural track, like a Caden Beatty, for example. But then all of a sudden, it's just these guys get on the field and something just, it just clicks, and all of a sudden they're, it's like a code word. It's they're the Winter Soldiers or something, and you say whatever, I can't remember what the word was in the Marvel movies, and all of a sudden they just turn into just machines.
It was, I think both of us almost fell over when we saw some of that unfolding on the practice field. I mean, I think that was one of my leads during fall camp, was that Cale Reeder comes across, because we talked to him, like you said, after the first day, and all right, kind of a soft-spoken guy, it's all good, but then he gets out there, and man, the things they were saying, we don't know all the actual words they were saying, but the ones we did hear, we definitely cannot repeat on this podcast. And so that kind of speaks to just the I think the fire in them, and I think that's kind of where you'd rather you guys be. Jamey, you have a second tweet that you want to answer right now?
Yes, but a lot. Where'd it go? Here we go. Let's see how. This is a good one. Why keep trying to establish the? This is from Fish at human_005. Why keep trying to establish the run when it clearly isn't working? It's going to be part of their identity. It's the same reason Mike Leach used to throw the ball 100 times when it wasn't working. I mean, I think they went in with a game plan, and that was to be able to run the ball, and they couldn't, and it's hard. It's hard to make that adjustment.
I think if there is something to criticize, well, I mean, we have, made a few criticisms. But I think, and this is what Rogers mentioned this afternoon, was that like they have to be a little quicker to make those kinds of adjustments. Like one thing that we noticed right away on the film after the game is that like how much they were crashing off of the edges, and that is what forced them to try these inside runs. And that in turn is when you saw guys that were not blocking the right guys, or on occasion they just got beat by their defenders. And so I think it's just a combination of things. I think it's like, some guys, sometimes you have Christian Hillborn blocking nobody. Sometimes, you guys have guys getting kind of, stood up in the back. Like, I think it's all different manner of things. And I think if there's one thing that they want to address in week 2, it's just kind of recognizing those kinds of patterns as they are happening, instead of, now we have 3 rushing yards and it's the final, it's the end of the game. So that's kind of where I am on that.
Yeah, no, I think for sure it's it's there's a lot of just again the finer details that kind of factor in that way.
For sure. All right, our next question is a little bit off the wall, not super pressing in terms of game to game. But next question comes from Luke Westfall, who I think was on the Evergreen staff recently. Says, who is the best 2026 NFL prospect on this team? Any players who have pro potential that fans might not expect? This is one we were talking about before we were waiting for Jamey to come talk to us this afternoon. And I thought about it a little bit, and my answer is honestly maybe a little bit off the radar. I'm going to go with Anthony Polano.
For the 2026 draft?
Oh, 26. Okay.
I'm going to say you're wrong, and that's only because he literally can't get drafted this year.
For sure. Okay. 2026. Who's a name that comes to mind for you?
I would just say, I think Tucker Large right away. I know there's going to be some questions about just his overall size. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but if you're talking about, I think, the best player that's going to be draft eligible, I think it's him. Durant's has the size. Hillborn's obviously experienced and a veteran, but if I had to say someone, I would probably go Large. I'll also mention Josh Meredith in a big way for special teams and what he can do in a variety of roles.
I think it would be more entertaining if we disagreed on something like this, or just there's more to listen to. But I have to agree. I think Tucker Large is far and away the pro prospect with the most potential in that way. Maybe the best. I mean, I don't think it's much of a stretch to say he's the best player on the defense right now. So I think in those ways, he's kind of our easy answer to that one. All right, who's our next question going to come from?
Next question. We answered that one. I just say a lot of you asked about Zevi. I think we kind of covered that with the first question. We're not going to go through every Zevi question, but we kind of answered that to start. There's one about run game issues we've kind of covered as well. So again, some of the questions that are repetitive or that we kind of cover, we're not going to go through every one. So we're not ignoring your questions, but just kind of establish that. Here's one from Phil Vandervoort. Are the Cougs a Big Sky team or a P5 team? RB seems like a strength for the squad, but are clearly not after one game. Is that on the RBs or the OL? Can a tight end be a target/threat to keep defenses honest? How long until Potter can run an RPO successfully? So we've kind of talked about the running backs. I think a lot of it is on the offensive line, getting some run blocking, some of it being also on the running backs a little bit, not finding it so much seams. Potter, we talked about the RPO and how he needs to address that, but the Cougs a Big Sky team or a Power 5 team? I think right now they're neither. I think they're a Group of 5 team. I mean, it's, I think they're certainly not a Big Sky team. I know that it was a close game with the Big Sky team, but, it's a pretty clear-cut difference when you start to go really deep into it. And as for the tight ends, I do think they want to get the tight ends more involved. I think we saw Trey Lecter make a really nice play on kind of in one of those drives, but I do think the tight ends are going to be something I think we'll see more of going forward.
Honestly, if there was one understated aspect of this game that I was most surprised by, and part of it is to do with first year starting quarterback, they made the tight ends out to be a big part of what they want out of their tight ends is the pass catching, I think we mentioned earlier, and a total of 2 targets for their 2 tight ends between Trey Lecter and Adamola Fallier, which we were both pleasantly surprised to see Fale makes some of the catches that he made during a fall game. I mean, for us, I mean, there's two one-handers that come to mind, and he really impressed as a pass catcher, and that's one of the. I mean, I think the biggest reason why they brought him over from Michigan State was the big body. We talked to a couple coaches last week about that, and that was kind of their main selling point on him. But what they were pleasantly surprised by was just his pass catching ability, and he has looked awesome with that. So for them to only have two targets, between them on Saturday, I think one I was surprised by, but two I don't think that will continue moving forward. I think they're gonna make a much more concerted effort to get them involved in the passing game. I think it maybe even simplifies things a little bit for Jaxon Potter because maybe these are shorter out routes. They're bigger bodies. They're not as he's not having to thread the needle to get the ball to those kinds of guys. So I think that is if there's a way to kind of unlock the offense and kind of help them break out of the slumps that plagued them on Saturday, is to get the tight ends more involved, because like I said, we have been super impressed with Fale's pass catching ability during fall camp. And Jamey here is a big Trey Lecter guy, and I'm not to say that I'm not, but he is, I think, more mobile, and if you're going to ask a guy to be more of a pass catcher between those guys, I think it would be Lechner. So I think when this next Saturday rolls around and they kick off against San Diego State, that is one, I think, offensive tweak that you could expect to see, which is kind of getting those guys more involved on offense.
Absolutely. Next question, JC at StateFan1219. Jimmy a likable guy or not? I like Jimmy.
Yeah, same.
Is he different than Jake Dickert? Yes, he is not rah-rah. He is not the big, in front of the camera, great person, big. Oh, I'm this big personality. He loves the public eye. Jimmy doesn't like the public eye. Jimmy wants to go just do football. That is, he speaks two languages. Actually, he might speak more than that. I shouldn't assume that, but English isn't his first language. Football is. So he's just, again, he's not the rah-rah guy that Dickert was, but I mean, he's a lot more kind of closed off in some ways too. But I've had zero. I have no issue with Jimmy. I like Jimmy.
No, I like Jimmy too. I think, like you said, it is a sea change from Jake Dickert, and I don't think the fans dislike that.
Well, we'll circle back to that part in November and see if they're losing to Wyoming at home.
Well, yeah, as an aside, kind of inauspicious start for Jake Dickert's Fighting Demon Deacons, beating Kennesaw State the other day. But outside of that, I like Jimmy too. I think he's definitely more reserved, which has forced guys like Jamey and I to kind of figure out how do we kind of, not get him to come out of his shell. I mean, he's a grown man. I mean, he makes his own decisions, but like there have been a few, instances over the last few weeks where we kind of got him to crack a smile. I mean, even today, we got that out of him with asking about the process of selecting Jaxon Potter as a starting quarterback. So I think he kind of gets a kick out of the question sometimes, which was, I was a little worried, honestly, during the first week of spring ball and the fall game. I'm like, man, is this guy ever get to smile with us? But that's kind of what you get with a guy that is football first.
I will say this too, and he's even said as much. He gives off being a lot more grumpy than he actually is. He said, he's like, I'm not as grumpy as I seem. He just, again, he's a pure football guy. I was watching the coaches show Thursday, and he got asked, what are 3 fun facts about you? And he was like, it's easier for me to answer football questions because the guy lives and breathes football. Like that is what he knows. That is what he does. So it's just, again, it's a different personality. But yeah, you can get him, to crack a smile, things like that. He's just not going to be necessarily a big joker the way maybe Dickert was. But, again, I think for some that shtick got old for people last year. I mean, for the media, Jake was always easy to work with. But I know for the fans who, he puts on this great kind of public image, and then he, loses to a 9 Wyoming at home.
Example of 3,482 of the media actually not being as big of a deal in coach's eyes as we make it out to be. One of our last questions here is going to come from Sam Russell, who asks, given the result against Idaho, would you revise your win prediction for WSU for the rest of the season? Not at all. I think this, in my mind, in terms of like how this changes what we expect from them out of the season, this did not change very much at all. I mean, honestly, they could have played a lot better, but in my mind, my outlook is the same as it was before the game.
I picked them to go 12-0. No, I picked them to go 7-5. They could have won this game 173-2, and I would have picked them to still go 7-5. One game is not a big enough sample size. Like I understand, the offense did not look good. It was very problematic. It was one game. 2015, a vaunted Mike Leach offense scored 17 points against a Portland State team with a new coach that had been one of the worst programs in the country for years. They went on to win 9 games. The offense was dynamic, and they made a bowl the next 7 seasons. So, I don't think either of us are underselling how bad the offense was on Saturday. I'll say this: if that is the offense we see all year, I don't think they'll be winning 7 games. But I think Greg and I are both in agreement. I don't think that's the offense we'll see all year. I do think there will be improvement, adjustment. I would, again, like I said, they could have won by 600 points, and I would have still said they're going 7-5 because that's what I started the season with my prediction of.
Sam, I'm realizing now that your bio says Rock Chalk Jayhawk. I am a K-State grad, Manhattan native, so I am regretting taking your question. No, I'm kidding, but that is kind of a funny twist.
Great work. He has Mahomes and Kelsey in his Twitter header, though. So you gotta take. It's Kansas, but it's also the Chiefs.
Well, I will take any Kansas connection that I can get up here. We have one on the team in Carter Pabst, a Wichita native. So we're actually doing a lot better in that department than you would expect.
He also, his first retweet's about the Sounders winning Leagues Cup, so he's good in my book.
All right, we're kind of running out of time. We are over an hour at this point. Jamey, are there any last ones you want to get to?
Just scrolling through right now to see if there's anything else. I think, a lot of these, again, the run blocking we talked about, the Zevi kind of we talked about. This is a good one. Max needs an 8th. Is life worth living if we don't throw for over 300 yards a game? I know this is strange for Cougar fans, again, as someone who started school at Wazoo in 2015. The air raid is all we know. Yes, life is worth living if they don't throw for over 300 yards a game. I don't know how many times they'll do it. Again, I think 31 throws is probably about how many, like the max they want to do, but I think they will be okay without throwing for over 300 yards a game. It's okay. It's different. It is for Washington State fans who, again, have known nothing but the air raid for the last 10 years. It is a different setup, but maybe there's a 300-yard rushing game in there somewhere. They had one last, didn't they?
Texas Tech.
Oh, but remember, wasn't there the late sack on John that knocked it down to like 290 or something?
Oh, maybe you're right.
There was something weird with, I remember, because it was whatever the play was, John was hot about. I don't know if they had 301. Okay, so they ended up with, maybe it wasn't like the program best or something, but 301 last year. So who knows? Hey, yeah, John Mateer threw for 115 yards against Texas Tech last year, and they won by 3 touchdowns over what ended up being an 8-win Big 12 team. So maybe there's something to be said about that.
For sure. Well, we did not get to all of the questions, but I think we covered all of the topics that were presented to us. So in that case, I think that's going to bring this podcast to an end. We really appreciate everybody listening. Honestly, I wasn't sure how this Q&A format would go. I didn't know how many responses we would get just based off the fact that we have one episode in the books, and at the time of recording, we did not have a name for the podcast. So this has gone a lot better than even I was expecting, to be honest. And I'm excited for episode 3. Again, we will be back next Monday. I know that episode 1 dropped on a Friday morning, but this is the format that we will follow for the rest of the season. On Mondays, we will get a chance to talk to Jimmy Rogers, who does his weekly press conferences on Monday afternoons. So look for these around this time every week. Well, Jamey, thank you for joining me.
Wait. We got a late question I actually think is kind of interesting from Dave Perman. Am I the only one who saw the defense missing tackles on almost every play? Everywhere I read is praising the defense, and yeah, they kept Idaho under control most of the evening, but I swear I saw our guys miss on average a tackle per play. So this is actually something Jimmy Rogers talked about. So the tackling has to be better. But Greg and I were talking about this too. There are different styles of missing a tackle. And what I mean by that is you can miss a tackle in the open field and the guy picks up 40 extra yards. Or you can miss a tackle, slow up the guy, and everyone can finish. There was a run play Jamey Colson comes in like he was shot out of a cannon, completely misses on the running back, but it also forces the back to move outside of where Colson's lane was and right into 4 or 5 more arms. So you can miss a tackle and get away with it if you're swarming to the ball.
For sure, and I think we are also in agreement that they did so much of that in Saturday's game. I mean, just like I said, the swarming to the ball, you don't want to miss tackles at all, obviously. But if you are going to, quote unquote, miss one, you would much rather do it with guys behind you. And I think more often than not, that is what happened with them on Saturday. Okay, well, I think unless we have some super duper late contributions, that will do it. Like I said, these will be coming out on Mondays for the rest of the season. So thank you guys for listening, and we will be back next Monday.